eliminate an egg by dropping its mitochondrial DNA before inserting its nuclear DNA, but for a viral update that allowed for that sperm to understand how to dump its mitochondrial genome before inserting nuclear DNA. So these are incredibly specific, jumps that happened that allowed for us to go from, birth through eggs to live birth. We couldn't have done it without the viruses. And now, so now that we get to ask these questions of, if the virome is not against us, and it was actually the foundation by which adaptation and biodiversification of the planet occurred, what does it mean to put ourselves in conflict with it? What does it mean to put ourselves in opposition to the virome? We are now in conflict with adaptation and biodiversity, which we now know is really the fabric of all of human health. We now know through gut health and genomics and all of the tissues in our bodies that a healthy body is teeming with an organic garden. And so this fear-mongering, reductionist approach of there's humans and there's everything else is putting us in opposition to life within us. And for every step we take away from biodiversity through chemical exposure, antibiotics, the herbicides, pesticides, which is a primary source of antibiotic kind of chemicals in our environment, we're sterilizing the human experience. And in our isolation, we have to live out the second law of thermodynamics, which is pretty profound, and it's never been proved wrong in any system. And what the second law of thermodynamics says is any system in isolation increases its entropy, chaos.
Yeah.
And so what you see happening in the socio-political environment, the polarization of human minds and thoughts, and it's tearing apart of families because are you pro-vax or are you vax or not? It's tearing apart, businesses and economic models all over the world. That chaos that you see is the necessary and immediate reaction of physics to the message from our public health officials to isolate. Everybody go home. Stay away from each other. Everybody kill everything around you. Make sure you're sterilizing your environment. Isolate the human experience. Humanity will have to express a higher level of chaos for that isolationism. And in that isolationism, we will destroy ourselves, as any cancer will destroy its greater organism and end up dying in its effort for conquest and sequestration of appearance of limited resources. And so this is the cancer of humanity. And yet we have this miracle happen all the time in hospice, which is we have to discharge hospice patients 10% of the time. 1 in every 10 patients that are admitted with less than 6 months to live, and the average in the United States is 3 weeks to live. If you get admitted to the hospital, you're being dead in 3 weeks on average. And yet 10%, 6 months later, 9 months later, a year later, they've resolved their disease. They're coming out of this terminal state. They're rebirthing something completely different, and they have to be discharged from hospice because they've chosen to live. So we're in our hospice moment. We are the metastatic cancer within our own system, and we could go through a miraculous healing if we will reintegrate into the nature that we've divided ourselves from.
So this becomes fascinating because there's multiple dimensions of this. There's the biophysics of it, the idea of separation, sterilization, et cetera, which seems to be going enthusiastically in the wrong direction if we want to really solve this problem. And it starts with a premise, right? The premise that viruses are bad, so you want to eradicate them, and that portrays you described as kind of as an arrogance or hubris, right? Well, I don't want these things around; they're a threat to me, and I'm going to eliminate them. Not even understanding that you're populated with them on an ongoing basis and reliant on them for your own survival. So that's the one aspect of it. Just saying from purely understanding environmental sciences, that's a pretty it's pretty extraordinary that really smart people take that view, and that's the hubris or the arrogance that they show up with. We're very smart, we're very well educated, and we can just go for separating and isolating and sterilization and ride a storm out and think that there'll be we're going to save some lives, as many lives as we can, without consequences on the other side of that. But another part of it is the psychodynamics, right? And when you start to think about what are the implications of creating fear in a human population, I mean widespread fear that is promulgated, almost that people literally, I think that fear is important and necessary as a solution to a problem, which is incomprehensible to me, but nonetheless that's what it looks like. And then separating humans from other humans, so that what kind of an effect would that have on individuals and families and the fabric of humanity in general? And then the economic stress, because we look at the spheres, you're saying, hey, here's your healthcare, let's call it your medical autonomy or lack thereof. Then socially, what's going to happen to you if you want to speak up and if you have a different point of view? Look at what's going to happen as far as you being censored. And then, of course, now what's happened recently, you can't go to work if you don't get vaccinated. So we seem that there's this compulsion aspect to this that we could have the narrow debates on vaccine good, vaccine bad, vaccine safe, vaccine not safe. And, quite frankly, from everything I've seen, it's bad, it's not safe, and, et cetera. But should somebody want it, maybe they can have access to it. But should people be compelled to do something against their own conscience in the name of the greater good? And from your view, in the way that you just laid it out, you're not getting into those debates or arguments. You're basically taking a step back, looking at a wider context, saying, this was inevitable based on where we are at this point in time, that these behaviors would emerge. And but let me ask this, because you talk about potential extinction event, meaning we don't kind of get rational here. This could all go away. And in hospice, you're saying 10% of the time somebody makes a choice and they're walking out. Are you seeing our odds at like 10% right now, saying maybe there's a 10% chance that humanity can get its act together and take a step back and say, wow, how irrational we're being, and we can make a different choice and we can walk out of this situation? I mean, is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, I think if you break down the medical model of where are we at from a biologic standpoint, and then understand it in the context of the macroeconomics of cancer. So once a tumor takes over 99% of the resources for the body that it's in, the body's done.
Right.
Your chance of survival 1% or less, right? Because 99% of the resources are being put into the cancer. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that that's exactly where we're at from a socioeconomic standpoint, is we have 99% of the wealth being controlled by the 1% of humans. Mm-hmm. And so our extractive, destructive economy is at its endpoint. You can't extract any more wealth out of the slavery that we've created through mortgages and through prison system and through the disease model. We've maximized extraction. So why is the Fed printing $4 trillion? It's because there's no more to squeeze out of the lemon. It's empty, and so we're doing quantitative easing. We're creating money out of nothing because...
Which in essence, if I could say, they're saying there's nothing left to squeeze with the existing populace, so we're going to print the money and try and squeeze it out of the future populace, which hasn't even been born yet, right? I mean, that's kind of a little bit of the logic.
Yeah, or what's typically seen with war, conquest, these things, is that there's for empire building, you have to empower the masses. You need to inspire them to create a bunch of stuff, and so they build infrastructure. And so you can look at Italy in the 1930s, which is a huge, massive depression. You can look at Germany in a huge, massive depression coming out of World War I. And those two countries had these individuals rise. You've got Mussolini, you've got Hitler, and these individuals arise not because of who they were, but because the terrain demanded their presence.
Yes.
The terrain of desperate human beings without a unifying philosophy of their own on how they were going to retain life and opportunity towards life, were happy to hand off all of that power to an individual who had a vision that they could follow. And that's where we're at today, is we have a massive global depression unfolding. And some people are aware of it, some people are in complete denial, but there is a massive depression. The biggest poverty event in history is unfolding right in front of us. And there's going to be this tendency to raise a couple of individuals that come out with a vision and say, we'll protect you. And if those individuals behave as they need to do, they're going to inspire the masses to go create a bunch more stuff. And so we'll mow down the Amazon and create more factory farms, and we'll build bigger cities in China, and we'll build new big cities in North Saudi Arabia, and we'll control nature so that we can start to extract nutrients deeper from soil systems in the Antarctic or up in the tundra that's been so far untouched. We're going to find more ways to extract and mobilize this. Once the extraction has reached its full potential, then they collapse the system to get all of that wealth from all of the masses into the few hands. And so we are in one of those cycles now of collapse. So when you fight a war, you send out all this economic growth, and then in the decades or two after the war, you get to collapse the system through economic, monetary policy, such that there's depression, recession, and there's monetary instability. And then you let the whole populace go into debt, and then the biggest debtor becomes the federal government or whatever it is, because they can start to leverage invisible wealth and build more and more wealth around them, extract more and more, and then they go into exponential inflation so that the debt shrinks. It's the only thing that can get debt to shrink when you don't have enough money to pay it off. You just go through inflation, and suddenly the $90 trillion of debt becomes really payable because it costs $5 trillion to buy a loaf of bread. So for 5 loaves of bread, you can pay off your national debt. So we're going through one of those cycles of we built great wealth through the economic expansion of the tech boom and the information technology environment, and we did that globally. Now we collapse that whole thing, and the few people become wealthy, and that creates desperation in the public, and it helps us rise some other dictator to power, and we give more power away so that they will stabilize the system. So these are the cycles we're in over and over again. And so are we going to go extinct? The answer is yes, if we keep doing that. And what is the likelihood of avoiding extinction? Probably 1% or less if we keep in that behavior. But excitingly, this recent pandemic has shown a change of mindset in a very large percentage of the population. And so I get excited when the powers that be in any empire start to overstep their presumed power, and they start to lose control of the narrative. And we've never seen in my lifetime a more extreme, desperate effort to control the narrative through widespread censorship and suppression of any sort of scientific debate around this. Is just pull their medical licenses, close down their medical journals, strip their funding. Like anybody who steps out of the common narrative here is being crushed. And on one side you can say, oh my God, that's horrible, it means that we're at the end of all things. And the other side of you is like, yeah, but every time they do that, we get the narrative starts to fail, because humans innately know what freedom feels like. And frankly, so does a bacteria. If you try to coerce a bacteria or kill it, it will immediately work to come around the threat. And nature has been brilliant in its ability to create 10,000 different pathways around that antibiotic that you're giving to kill that bacteria. And it will do that by sharing its genetic information with its neighbors while it dies, and then its neighbors will rebirth it. It's that resilient. It's that far-reaching.
Right.
You challenge me, I'm going to give everything I have out to nature so that it can return to me again in a new iteration of self. It's this ultimate empiric capacity for freedom that is being lived out by the microbiome, by the virome, and ultimately by every organism on the earth. Those organisms that are going extinct, one species every 20 minutes now, blinking out. In those last few minutes of life, they're passing all their genetic information out as new possibility and say, okay, as a triceratops, I may never walk this earth again, but I'm going to send out a new possibility. I am going to share in a co-creative imagination of birds. I am the fern dying at the moment of this great extinction 60 million years ago, and I'm going to give up a new possibility by misspelling and creating new interpretations of my own genomics to imagine a flowering plant. And the ferns did that. We got deciduous trees, and we got the meadow flowers, and that inhabit these mountains around us in Park City. And it's just like there's so much beauty because in its death throes, nature said we could do it better. And the moment that extinction was happening, life was created more abundantly. The fabric of our makeup is that we are going to have to participate in that. In the next iteration of life, whether it be humans changing our behavior and being discharged from hospice, or a new intelligent life on this earth. Imagine what replaces a butterfly. What's more beautiful than a blue morpho? Imagine what's more self-aware than humans. That will happen. Yeah. It's coming on this planet. There's a higher intelligence going to unfold. And as a selfish being, I kind of want to see it. I want to be in it. I want to play in that sandbox. Yeah. I want to be co-creating with Mother Nature. Yeah. And I know we can do it right now. I know that through all of this existential threat and everything else, we can suddenly see our self-identity anew.
Do you think that's happening? Because in line with what you were just saying about the censorship and the narrative, et cetera, do you see a virtue saying, hey, it's forced the issue and it's going to create a rebellion that maybe becomes a renaissance for humanity because they've overstepped, when I say they, these forces and these people have overstepped with their arrogance, thinking that they can control the masses, control the narrative, and they miscalculated the quest for truth and freedom that lies in the souls of all humans. So do you see that that's maybe the positive and necessary outcome that this COVID world possesses?
It's almost inevitable, right? That in some parallel universe, this is going to work, And I really believe that if we can dream it, it's happening somewhere in the multiverse, right? Okay. And we can dream this. We can see a civilization of humanity reintegrate all of its thought processes, sociopolitical policies, all of its intellectual, intuitive, innovations back into nature's template. And we could become co-creators in it. It's beyond a dream. We actually know the mechanisms by which we would participate. I mentioned Cas9 earlier, this little enzyme that is the entire database of decision-making. Do you take on this viral DNA or do you reject it? The scientific pair of scientists that discovered that, in 2015, Dr. Duano, she gave a TED Talk on her partner who discovered Cas9, and she said in 2016, in a TED Talk, Cas9 is the equivalent of a vaccine card.
Yeah, I saw that.
And so, would she have been able to say that in 2020? No, but she won the Nobel Prize in 2020 for discovering Cas9. But in an insidious way, the Nobel Prize was given for Cas9 because it became the cornerstone of CRISPR genetic engineering, where we would go and tinker with things like RNA, vaccines or whatever we're going to call them. And so our very moment, this holy of holies that we discovered in how do we actually stay in balance with a virome, we gave the big award, we gave that big Nobel Prize for showing how it could be co-opted and owned and manipulated by human interaction. And in so doing, we stole the power of the discovery. If we back up, so you asked, is this possible? And I said, yes, we can dream it, and I can show you the mechanisms by which we will start to chart our co-creative capacity. When we start to learn that we can support Cas9 in its intelligence, and we could actually accelerate our input of genomic sequences in there to figure out how does humanity actually reverse the germline mutations that are now brewing in our sperm right now, that are going to pass on germline mutations that will be the end of our species, 2030, 2050, somewhere in that zone. We start passing on germline mutations that are not escapable by our current understanding of biology, Cas9, and understanding how it could be the interface to a new genetic intelligence within humanity. We could solve for that. We could let nature solve for the crisis we've created if we put Cas9 on an elevated, hallowed ground of investigation to say, how can we help you, Cas9? Instead of how can we exploit you, Cas9? And so the mechanisms by which we will dream that new reality, by which we will create that new reality, are sitting right before us. We can genetically sequence every organ, and we can see the message again and again. Biodiversity creates liver health, brain health, prostate health. Every organ system is about biodiversity in the organic garden. Beautiful. How do we create birthing rooms that immediately introduce